You're listening to the Patriot Nation podcast.
All right, welcome into another edition of the Patriot Nation podcast. As always, a proud member of the CLNS group of podcasts. Make sure you download and subscribe to all of those great shows to get great Patriots content all week long. But tonight, it's your boys Pat Lane and Matt St. Jean at the Patriot Nation podcast. And Matt, this is like maybe arguably the best time of the year. Sunday, the Bruins and the Celtics both kick off their postseason play, but not to be outdone. The Patriots on Thursday start the NFL draft. And of course, that's what we'll be talking about here, the NFL draft.
And also the Red Sox playing baseball games, technically.
Yeah, they don't exist. They don't exist until the summer when no one else is playing.
What I will say is this. The fact that people are so interested in like the draft of the Patriots, and then hopefully you get a couple weeks out of the Bruins and at least a month out of the Celtics here, really buys the Red Sox some time to figure things out. That's the whole last thing for them. Which I will say. It sure does. There's that stat that's like when the Red Sox starting pitcher makes what they call like a quality start, like you get through 6 innings clean, and I think no more than like 3 runs, they have not lost this year. When they don't, they have not won.
Well,
given the fact that this is the 3rd highest payroll for a pitching staff in all of baseball, like I don't think Garrett Crochet does what he did earlier this week, again for the rest of the season. Ranger Suarez is finding it. Sonny Gray has been decent. If the pitchers pitch the way we think they're going to pitch, the team probably wins a lot of baseball games. The problem is we started off the year with none of the pitchers performing well except for early.
That's true.
And a couple good starts from Gray. And the hitters who we like, the strategy is like have a top 3 pitching staff in baseball, and the hitters just have to be fine. And the hitters have been... Well, the hitters have been fine the last 2 weeks, but the first week and a half were abysmal.
Yeah, I mean, the Red Sox are dead to me. The Red Sox are dead to me. Right? They're dead to me. I can't get into it. They just after the Mookie Betts trade, and then to trade Rafael Devers and then take the best piece from that trade and instantly trade it for an absolute bum. Everyone in the world knew that whatever that schmuck was out in L.A. was an absolute bum. Everyone knew it. He wasn't making the postseason roster. That's why they traded him. You traded the best piece of that deal for nothing. It's just like, what is wrong with them?
Yeah, that trade was dumb. Probably my least favorite of the moves that Breslow has made. I will say that said, you might want to look up the stats for James Tibbs over like the last week. He started out like one of the hottest players in all of the minor leagues. He's like 3 for his last 30 with 14 strikeouts. So that might end up looking like a trade with no winners instead of, a winner and a loser when it's all said and done.
I suppose.
Yeah.
But,
Well, like the Devers has not played well this year. And like, if the idea is we're going to get rid of that money from Devers because we don't like the long-term thing and we're going to reinvest that in pitching, if the pitching performs well this year and the things come together, I can buy into it. It's just that they need to perform that way.
Yeah, but again, you traded him for a nobody. So that's, anyways, doesn't matter. All right, we're done with this. We're done. We're done with the Red Sox. Moving on to the Patriots. Where do you want to start here? Do you want to start? You want to start your article? I think your article is a good kind of jumping off point.
We can do this.
So if you didn't catch it,
it is 1 week until the NFL draft.
It is 1 week until the NFL draft. A week from today, the draft will be going on. I will be in international waters somewhere, trying to find some Wi-Fi signal in the podcast. We'll see how it goes, but we'll see what happens. So, but your article today on Pat's Pulpit, if you haven't seen it, go check it out. But it's 4 reminders to keep yourself grounded during the NFL draft. And I think we get lost sometimes, and you do a nice job of kind of laying this up. We get lost sometimes where, you know, we're looking at it saying, oh, well, this guy has to be this. You know, I get in arguments with my cousin all the time because he's like, well, Will Campbell's the number 4 pick. He should be an all pro. And I'm like, well, that's not how it works. Like, you're trying to get the guy that's going to be good for you for as long as you possibly can. And he was the guy that fit best. He fit the culture the best. He fit what they needed the best. And they thought that he had a really high ceiling. So they brought him in. Like, and maybe he's not an all pro. Maybe he's a very good player for 10 years. If he's a very good player for 10 years, that's worth the number 4 pick on the draft. It just is. Like, so, you know, anyways, that's kind of where you started. And so your first thing, and I think that this to me, when you start talking about what they should do at 31, your first reminder here is that you get to keep your guys for 4 years. All the players that you draft are on your team for 4 years. And that just makes a big difference because you're not just drafting them for 2026. You're drafting them for 2027 and 28 and 29, and even, you know, and even who knows where down the line. And we'll get into that with you, with one of your other ones as well.
Yeah, well, and I think it's like when you think of the concept of need during the NFL draft, it's very easy, especially when you're a team that was just in the Super Bowl, to look at the Super Bowl and go, what were the missing pieces so we could have won that game? But that's not really how the draft works. Like,
right.
What worked to win the Super Bowl after the 2025 season is something that teams will probably have figured out by the time you get to the end of the 2026 season. The NFL is cyclical and people adapt and change. And if you're trying to win last year's battle, you're not going to set yourself up for success in the long term. And then one of the things I put into the article, like the players that you draft this year, you're kind of hoping that these guys are peaking usually third year of their contract, especially when you look at your second, third, fourth round picks, any developmental guys you're taking. The Patriots have 19 players under contract for 2028 right now, which would be the year that these guys are hitting peak form. That number does not include Drake May or Christian Gonzalez right now. I would expect that to change.
Yeah.
But of the 19 guys they have under contract, over half of them are just last year's draft class. So, you know, that can probably will change pretty dramatically by the time you get to the end of camp this year when guys don't make the team.
Right.
5 of those guys are guys that were signed in free agency this past offseason. And you got a couple guys with extensions than Milton Williams deal. But I think the other key thing is that other than Will Campbell and Trevion Henderson, and then presumably Drake May and Christian Gonzalez, every one of those guys under contract in 2028, you can move on from if you want to. You will save money. So look, I think this is what makes this draft so interesting for the Patriots is that despite being in the Super Bowl last year, they are kind of a blank slate going forward. Like you know you have Milton Williams, a defensive tackle. You don't think you're moving on. You got the quarterback. You got a cornerback. There are good players like Romeo Doubs, guys like that, good players on this team. Will Campbell, who's, you know, going to hopefully become your long-term starter at left tackle. You have a lot of key pieces, but most of your 53-man roster has not been decided yet. So, you know, when you get to the second, third, the fourth, the fifth round, just the fact that you have someone who's a starter at that position this season doesn't mean that investing at that same position is, you know, a bad idea because you're looking for these starters for the next couple of years.
Well, and it's a great point, right? It's a great point by you because it's one of those things where you look at it and say, okay, well, you know, who is going to be the guy in this spot? And outside of quarterback, cornerback, and like you say, you know, defensive tackle and probably hopefully left tackle, you know, we don't know where it is. And T points out that those first round pick guys do have a 5th year option, which is true. And so you know, you can,
which I think we'll touch on here in my next reminder.
Yeah. And so, you know, but this is one of those situations where the Patriots have a blank slate, and we've talked about this ad nauseum. You do not want to be the Washington Commanders. You don't want to be the old team that's just rebuilding and saying, oh, man, we're going to be back in the playoffs. We're going to be back in the AFC Championship game. And so we just got to get a bunch of veterans. No, that's not what you need. And I think that we've seen the Patriots not want to do that. And how have we seen that? We've seen that because every single guy that they signed to a 1-year contract last year, they did not bring back. Every single one of them. Yeah. So, you know, it's one of those situations where, and that may not be 100% true, but everyone that went into the off season without a deal did not come back. And so it's one of those situations where you look at it and say, okay, we feel pretty good about the way that we're trending. We've signed some guys that are good players, but maybe not the best players in the world, right? KJ Britt's never going to, win any Defensive Player of the Year awards, and neither is Julian Hill or anything like that. And, I think Romeo Dobbs is a nice piece for you, but he's not going to win Offensive Player of the Year or anything like that, right? These are guys that are good players, but not true game-changing players. And I think that, that's what you got last year with Milton Williams, and that's what you were hoping for from guys like Robert Splain and things like that. And Kevin Byard's a good point by Nikhil, too. He's a little bit older, but Kevin Byard's a good point. So, but for the most part, you're saying, all right, we're going to rely on these young guys to take steps. We're going to rely on the guys that are already in the program to continue to take steps, and then bring in guys to compete. And I think it's a smart way of doing business by this team, and I think that they have a good foundation in place, and I think that they have a good strategy in place. We saw how much the roster turned over last year. That's kind of happening again with all these guys leaving now, and then we got new guys coming in. Are they going to make all 11 picks? Probably not, right? But they're going to be able to bring in a good amount of people to to continue. And the other thing, you talked about 2028, but your second point here is that you get first dibs on re-signing players. If your players are good that you draft, then you're sitting there saying, okay, we want this guy. All right, well, if we want this guy, then we can re-sign him. We have first dibs at re-signing him, right? They want Christian Gonzalez. They clearly want Christian Gonzalez around. But, that's not necessarily going to be guaranteed. But they do have first dibs on him. He can't go out and negotiate with other teams. They are allowed to negotiate with him now. And so hopefully they get something done. But this is one of those situations where they are in a good situation because you can negotiate with him first without anyone else stepping in.
Well, and that long-term option, the fact that, if you draft a guy in the first round, you're guaranteed to get him for the first 5 years. If you want him for the first 5 years, you can start negotiating contracts after that third season. If you draft good players, that can fix a position of need for you, not just for the rookie contract, but through a second contract, through potentially a third contract. And obviously, different players have different longevity, and there's a lot of factors that go into this. But, we talk about being a blank slate in 2028 in a lot of ways. Well, if you draft a couple good players this year, even if they're not stars, even if you get guys who are Romeo Dobbs level good, but at other positions, well, now you're going to get first dibs at re-signing them, and you don't have to let them hit the open market like Dobbs does, and you can keep them in-house and, start to layer some of that depth in your organization that you're trying to build. And then the flip side of this is that every team gets that opportunity. Other than Milton Williams, there have not been a lot of elite free agents recently because every team gets this opportunity to re-sign their best players. And as long as the NFL keeps making this much money and the cap keeps going up at the rate it is, I don't think you're going to see a lot of elite players hit free agency. So if you want those guys, you got to get them in the draft. And I think this is where positional value becomes a little bit of a factor, just because part of the value of drafting the guy is that if you get him for the second contract, you have to take into account, well, how good do we think he might be on the second contract? So if you're drafting a guy, I'll throw out Akeem Mesidor, 25-year-old defensive end in this year's draft. For the Patriots looking at a guy like that, the things you have to balance is that he might end up being really good. And, as a rookie, he's going to be amazing for you. When you sign him to that second contract, edge defenders start to fall off pretty quickly in their early 30s, typically.
Unless you're Von Miller.
Yeah. So, if that's what you're looking at, how does that play, and how do you value that as an organization compared to, the other end of the equation is Keldrick Falk, same position, someone who is 20 years old, and it basically just traits. You have not seen him be a good pass rusher yet, but in theory, he has the ability to do it, and he's 20 years old. So, he's 5 years younger than Mesidor. You get him for a full second contract where he won't be 30 yet by the end of that. And, there's that long-term value is very important.
That's one of the reasons why I think Falk's going to go in that top 20. I just think it's going to happen. I do think it's interesting here. Patriots fan here says, warning us about Swinson still in the mix. And it's a good point, right? Like they have guys under contract they drafted. If you look at when they were great, when the Patriots were great, when they won their Super Bowls, there's common threads, right? That 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 run, that run right there was set up starting in 09 with Julian Edelman, then in 2010 with Devin McCourty, Rob Gronkowski, and others. 2011, you draft who the hell was the guy they drafted in the first round? 2011. Shoot,
Razai Dowling that year.
Maybe okay. 2011 is a bad idea. Bad example. But 2012, you draft Donta Hightower and Chandler Jones, right?
Or 2011, I think Nate Solder in 2011.
2011 was Solder, yes, because he started the Super Bowl.
And I think Razai Dowling was the second round pick that year.
You're right. So you have Solder, and then 2012 you're drafting Hightower and Chandler Jones, right? And then you go down the line and you're like, oh, okay, like we're getting these players, and I believe 2013 was, if I'm not wrong, I think 2013 was the year that they traded back.
They got Jamie Collins.
And got Jamie Collins, right? And
Logan Ryan and Deron Armand.
Right. So it's like, so you see the pieces from those right drafts. And Lawrence Maroney was long to Lawrence Maroney, I think was 06, I believe.
Either 05 or 06.
So, but either way, right? It's one of those things where you start looking at it and you say, that's how you build a winning team. And then you see what happens from 2014 on, and it's like, it's not so much. Then all of a sudden, the drafting falls off, and now the team isn't good anymore, right? So you need to be able to stack good drafts, and they had a good draft last year. We can argue about how good it was, but the fact is, we had a good draft last year, and so if we can continue to build on that and continue to get good drafts, then that's where you look at it and say, okay, now we can get that. So anyways, we'll see how it goes, but ultimately I think that's really where we want it to be here. We got to continue to draft well.
Yeah. I mean, that's the key to it. And I think that segues us perfectly into excuse me, my third reminder as part of this. It's kind of keeping an eye on the long-term view, especially in the modern league. The roster is basically 70 players big right now, with 53 on the active and 17 on the practice squad. There's ample opportunity to draft and develop guys, to draft and stash guys. And again, keeping with that long-term view of not knowing what your future needs are going to be. You can draft guys now because you think they're good. You don't know where they fit yet, but you like them. And we're going to figure out later exactly how this guy fits because it's the 5th round and we think we can take this chance. Mm-hmm. The example I used here was Marcus Cannon, who's part of this string of drafts that we talk about. He had a cancer diagnosis coming out of college. They took him in the 5th round. Didn't know what position he was going to play. They announced him as a guard at the draft. And he really does not play much for most of his early career. He is also in that 2011 draft with Nate Solder. He plays in only 7 games, no starts his first year, 1 start the next year, 6 starts, 4 starts the next year, 8 starts in 2015. That's when he's playing behind Sebastian Vollmer, mm-hmm. when you have all the injuries on the offensive line that year. So for the first 4 or 5 years of his career, he just kind of swings around as a backup for you in a couple spots and works to develop and can't really land a job. And then 2016, Fulmer goes down again. He ends up retiring. Cannon has to be your starting tackle for the year. He's second team All-Pro. He's that good. And it's just because you're like, in 2011, we like this guy. We're going to take a chance on him, even with some of the other stuff. Yep. And it works out for you long term. Right. And like you mentioned, Julian Edelman in here. They draft Julian Edelman as a converted QB to wide receiver. The same year they've got Wes Welker and Randy Moss on the team.
Right.
You draft Tom Brady in 2000. Happy Tom Brady anniversary yesterday. I think that was. Is it today?
I believe it was yesterday. I believe it was yesterday, but I could be wrong.
But you famously draft Tom Brady with Drew Bledsoe on the roster. The fact that you think you have something figured out now or for the near future shouldn't stop you investing in guys because you think they're good. Like you have to play the long term. You have to the durability is an issue in this sport. Longevity is an issue in this sport. You never know when a guy is going to stop playing well. You want to look at another example. The Eagles taking Jalen Hurts when they have Carson Wentz and they've signed him to a deal. Like you just keep taking swings at spots if you think the players are good.
Right. The Chiefs did it. They had Alex Smith and they traded up for Patrick Mahomes. This is so.
And I think this is something we pretty routinely saw Bill Belichick do. And it's one of the things you can do when you're a good team is you have fewer needs, so you can draft at positions that aren't close to being immediate needs because you have extra picks to do that. Mm-hmm. But the whole, drafting guys a year early, with an eye on replacing guys into the future, was a Belichick staple for a long time. A lot that gives you that flexibility. You'd rather have too many good players in a spot than too few.
It's true. It's very true. And that kind of leads us nicely into this last one, which is know what you don't know.
Yeah.
We just don't know what guys are going to be. Teams don't know what guys are going to be, right? So you want to try to draft the best player that you can. The problem is that there's a myriad of things that can happen to that guy. Maybe the culture doesn't work. Maybe he gets involved with things he shouldn't get involved with. Maybe he has a bad breakup and it messes with him mentally. Maybe he gets hurt. Maybe, who knows what. There's a million things that can happen to that guy, right? Maybe he doesn't work as hard as you think he's going to work. Maybe, there's all these different things that could or could not happen. And it's one of those things for me where this is kind of that, hey, if you think the guy's good enough, just draft him and then just figure it out afterwards, And you mentioned in there, though, just because you love a guy, you don't have to move heaven and earth to go get him, right? You also don't have to draft him a round or two earlier than everyone else, right? Certainly not in the first round. It's one thing if you think he's maybe a 7th round pick and you take him in the 5th round, that's a different story. If you think this guy's a 3rd or 4th round pick and you're drafting him in the first line, the Patriots did with Cole Strange, you don't need to do that.
You're probably wrong. Well,
right.
And I think if you listen to podcasts around this time of year, I think one of the things that sometimes frustrates me is that how many times do you hear this guy's a future Pro Bowler thrown out around prospects? I mean, You hear that about every player that gets taken in the first round and probably 20 to 25 others that will go later. And it's I just pulled some numbers on it. For the 2021 draft, 32 first-round selections, 10 of the 32 have been to a Pro Bowl.
Right.
One. That's a third of them, less than a third of them.
One of those was Mac Jones.
Yep.
So that doesn't even count. Throw it out.
Only 6 have made multiple Pro Bowls. 4 of them have been a first-team All-Pro at some point.
Right.
When we're and those guys who might end up on a Hall of Fame trajectory.
Yeah.
So that's and the 2022 first round so far is very similar. Mm-hmm. And half of these guys who are Pro Bowl or all pro types, those they're going near the top too.
Well, and that's the thing is
the idea that you can't. This is where I think trading back becomes valuable. If you're the Patriots at 31, from a macro lens, the odds that the player that's picked at 31 and the player that's picked at 38, that one of these, at 31, that guy's going to be a Pro Bowler, and whoever you pick at 38 has no chance. There's really not that much of a difference there in overall odds. So that's where you have to know, all right, if we're at 31, we like where we're at. We got 3 players on the board that we like. But an offer comes in that we like. Even if you're man, we might miss out on all 3 of those guys, sometimes you have to know, hey, we like these guys. All of these guys could stink. And I think that's the reality of real. That's
right. If you
probably 10 guys that get taken in the first round this year are just going to be bust. They're not going to be good. And yet no one on the draft podcast is going to say, yeah, this guy's going to go in the first round and he's going to be a bust. No one's going to say that.
And of course you're not going to say that about any of those guys because you want them all to be successful and you're kind of stamping it saying we think that this guy has the talent to go in the first round. And so but again, as I said, there's a million things that are going to happen. I think, if you were to do a statistical analysis of it and you were to look at, instead of looking at it round by round, we can look at it, just break it up into groups. So go by 12 picks or go by 13 picks or go by 15 picks if you want to, whatever it might be. Let's say you go by 12 picks. Or the first 12 and the second 12 are probably going to be pretty good, right? After that, you're talking about 24 to 36. I would imagine, and I haven't done it in quite a while, but the last time I did it, probably 7 years ago or so, it's pretty similar. That third 12 and that fourth 12 and even that fifth 12 are all pretty similar as far as hit rate. So you're talking about once you get into that late 20s, there's not really that much of a difference between the 40s. Now, listen, would I rather pick in the late 20s than the early 40s? Sure, because then I get the choice of the guy and I get the guy that I would prefer. But statistically, you're just as likely to hit on a guy in the mid 40s as you are in the late 20s and early 30s. You just are. That's just what the facts say. And again, that doesn't mean that you want to move back. But also, if you're at 31 and you're moving back to 42 or whatever, you're getting a good amount. You're getting a good amount back, right? And so I think that that's kind of the idea, is that based on the compensation, it makes sense for you to do that. And I think that that's why I look at it and say, okay, I like this because we can add that extra compensation and we still feel like we're getting the same type of way. Maybe not the best player, maybe not a guy that's going to be a surefire, Pro Bowl Hall of Fame, but we have the same chance of getting a guy, And when you're at 31, you're probably not sitting there saying, this is my favorite guy in the draft. The Patriots may have been sitting there at 4 saying, this is our guy. He's our favorite guy in the draft. They might have been sitting there at 3 the year before, Drake May, saying, this is our favorite player in the draft. If we had the number 1 pick, we'd take this guy. That's not happening at 31. You might like that guy, but he's not your favorite player in the draft. There's just no chance. It just doesn't make sense. And if he is, either you should be getting fired or 30 other GMs should be getting fired, right? So it's one of those things where it's like, you're just not drafting that guy. And so maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong, who knows? But again, history says that you're liable to get the same type of player at 31 as you are at, 38, 42, anywhere around there.
Yeah. Well, and then bring it back around to just the mindset to have as a fan going into the draft. Keep in mind the NFL teams spend tens, hundreds of millions of dollars on researching the draft.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about, personnel and travel and software and logistics and, it's definitely hundreds of millions. It's a lot of money that goes into this. Half the first rounds are guys who are just like this. It's very difficult to be good at drafting players. Most teams are not good at this consistently, even investing as much money as they do. So knowing that the people who are the best at this in the whole world, at least right now with all of these resources, still aren't that great, as a fan, generally speaking, unless it's a Cole Strange situation where it's like, man, where did this guy come from?
Right.
You probably shouldn't be freaking out on draft night about any kind of selection that's made. Just because, they're not we probably don't know better than teams, and teams usually don't know how this is going to go. You're
Correct.
guessing. It's projections.
100%.
So gotta keep a little steady as she goes attitude, I think.
Well, ultimately, at the end of the day, you're not drafting robots. You're drafting people, and those people get hurt and they have issues, and sometimes they're not as motivated as you think they would be. And sometimes they don't gel with your coaching staff the way you thought that they would. And sometimes they just get the yips, and sometimes they're just mentally not there. And there's a million different reasons why guys don't work out. And sometimes it's on the organization, not the player, right? And so, it's just...
Well, there's also... What I'd throw out, too, is that there's a lot of, middle-range outcomes here where, you draft a player, and you think, man, this guy has Pro Bowl potential.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's fine. He's a guy I kind of think back to in this, I don't know, Ty Warren, taken 13th overall in the draft. He was a good player for a while. I don't know if he ever, no All-Pros, no Pro Bowls,
no.
6 years as a starter.
Yep.
And it's guys like that, even like just avoiding missing on those picks, I think is really
Correct.
big. Because the fact that like even though Ty Warren isn't, the Hall of Famer you hope you can take with a 13th overall pick, he's a good player. And
Correct.
that saves you the money you would have had to spend to go get a starter like that in free agency who's going to be a lot more expensive that you can invest in a different spot. I think
exactly.
When you have those roster holes pop up because of draft misses, that has a chance, it snowballs into bigger problems because you end up spending a lot of money, draft picks, or both on the same positions over and over, and then the rest of the roster starts to decay, as we saw, the last 5 years with kind of the Belichick era into the Mayo era before this season, and I think especially in this draft where it's not the highest end at the top, I think you just got to be okay with singles and doubles. You would love to come out of this draft class with a multi-time Pro Bowl level edge rusher. That would be awesome.
Right.
If you get a guy who can give you 30 sacks on his rookie contract, what does that end up being? That would be 7.5 sacks a season, basically.
Yeah, if you count in 4 years, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I think you got to be happy with that.
Absolutely.
It's not going to be any Pro Bowls. This guy's not going to get a massive contract. He's probably going to go down as a quality second edge rusher in the NFL. But that helps you win games. And those guys, you can see, get a lot of money.
Well, and that's the other part of it is where you look at it and say, I think the Ty Warren example is a great example because he's a good player. We appreciate how good he was because he was here. But if you were to ask people around, non-Patriots fans, you would look at it and say, okay, like, yeah, I guess that guy Ty Warren was fine, but like, you had Richard Seymour, you had all these other guys. You end up drafting, Vince Wilfork, right? So like, yeah, okay, like he was fine, but he wasn't like your best player. No, he wasn't our best player. But as you said, he's a solid starter for you and a really good football player. And yeah, it's only that 6-year span or whatever. He's really good, but still, that helps you significantly. And of course, they win some Super Bowls because of it, right? And so it's just, it's part of that, part of that thing. So, anyways, and I think this is ridiculous, dude.
Your camera?
I touched the camera again, and it's mad.
Pat's got some technical difficulties over there. There he is.
Let's do an ad read here. We're a little behind on our ad read, so let's do an ad read, and then we will get into the second half of this. This ad read, of course, is for Prize Picks. The playoff push is heating up, and tournament hoops are here. And there's no better way to cash in if you're right on the high-flying hoops action than Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks app. Every bucket, every dime, and every win means more when you're playing on Prize Picks. And with their brand new Teams Picks markets, you can now pick game winners, spreads, and totals on top of the player picks you already know. So cash in if you're right during all the clutch buckets, slam dunks, and Cinderellas this spring with Team Picks on Prize Picks. Let's see what's out here. The NBA playoffs, the play-in game, continues on Friday. And I'm looking at a few guys here. Jokic, this seems like a guarantee slam dunk. Jokic with more than 25.5 rebounds plus assists. 25.5 is a lot for rebounds plus assists, but in a play-in game, I don't know, man. On Saturday, I think that's a winner there for me. And then I'm looking at, let's see, I'm going to go with Anthony Edwards for more than 26.5 points on Saturday as well, right? That's that battle there between Denver and Minnesota. That's going to be a fun one. So I think we're going to go there. And I'm also going to go with LaMelo Ball Friday night, more than 23.5 points. Look, it's the playoffs. These are when the big guys come out to play. And so those are the guys that I'm looking at. You can look at anyone you want. We can also, remember, as a reminder, can pick winners and spreads as well with the team's picks. But I'm going to go still with some player stats. Anyways, what you're going to do, download the Prize Picks app today and pick your favorite game winner, spread, or total as the playoff push rolls on. And get $50 in daily fantasy lineups when you play your first $5 lineup when you use the code CLNS. Again, that's code CLNS to get $50 in daily fantasy lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Prize Picks Predict is a registered FCM offering team picks and culture picks as event contracts. Trading involves significant risk, not for all. The content provided is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, a recommendation to trade any commodity interest, or an offer to open an account. CLNS is not a registered with the CFTC or NFA. Prize Picks Predict does not endorse or guarantee any statements made by third-party promoters or influencers. Please consult with a qualified professional before making any trading decisions. Okay, so let's see. Let's see where we're going from here. We got some burning questions.
Yeah.
And the first burning question I'd like to start with, and I was thinking about it anyways, but I'm also going to give a shout out to Mason, who DM'd me a question. And here's the question. Let's say the sixth tackle, whether it be Blake Miller or Ian Nature, depending on, who it is, right, goes off the board at 22. Are you giving up something to go up and get him? To go up and get that seventh guy? Again, whether it's Miller or Max, either way, right? Are you giving up something significant to go up and get him?
Well, I think it depends on what we mean by significant. This is something I really don't know how they feel on it. I will tease that in my mock draft that'll come out next week. We explore this very scenario. I personally, I think, would be willing to move up to go get one of those tackles. But I think this marries neatly with one of the questions I had. We can kind of expand this topic just a little bit, which is which prospects are the Patriots be willing to trade up for in the first round? Because I think tackle is the very interesting and obvious one. If you got to go move up, whether it's 3 spots or 5 spots or 10 spots, because you want one of these tackles, you think there might be a run. I think that makes sense. But are there others? There's a couple other players in this group that they have brought in for top 30 visits. The other name that stands out to me there is Casey Concepcion. And it's, all right, if Concepcion is there at 27, are you moving up for him? As for moving up, I think you got multiple 4th-round picks, so that gives you some ammo right there. And I think parting with 95 and one of those 4ths moves you up, 10-ish spots in that first round to get any of these guys.
Yeah, and ultimately, to me, it's about how much does it cost to get up there, right? Because and TD says that it's going to cost a first and a third, or as much as even a second, to move up into the top 20. I think not moving up to the top 20 is a lot. That to me is too much. If you want to move up to 20, even 24 is a bit, but you want to move up to, say you want to move up to 24, 25 with Chicago, 27 with San Francisco. 27 you're getting into, that's 26 points. 125 is 21 points. So you trade 125 and one of your 6-rounders and you're getting up to 27. Again, value-wise, right? If we're talking about value-wise, you want to move up to 24 or, to 25, you're probably going to have to part with at least 95. And then maybe something a little bit more, maybe 95 and one of those 6-round picks, right? So to me, it's all about the value of it, the cost of it. And then you also have to figure out, okay, well, are we trading for A.J. Brown? Because if we're giving up future picks for A.J. Brown, then I'm not moving up in the draft for Casey Concepcion, right? Also, I learned that Casey is just Kevin Concepcion. And then we say Kevin Concepcion. I feel like he has to be here because it's Drake made May. And then it's Kevin Concepcion. And I feel like that's like a match made in heaven. You know what I mean?
Well, what you add, like one of my other questions on here is the same thing. It's how would drafting receiver change their trade plans?
Right.
Because this is my other thing. We point out the long-term need aspect of this. Like, is there a world where you're taking Concepcion at 31 and still making a move later on for AJ Brown? I think that's possible because Brown is someone who is likely a shorter-term investment here. I think you'd be hoping for 2 good years out of him. Anything more than that is gravy.
Mm-hmm.
Dobbs is a mid-tier receiver, and he's going to help you. But like, if you're looking for a long-term superstar, AJ Brown is not that solution.
Right.
So that is still a position of need for you, and there's also no such thing as having too many good receivers. Like if you break camp and it's like, man, where are we going to find snaps for all these guys? That's a good problem to have, and also, like if you move for AJ Brown and draft Concepcion, and you get to the end of camp and it's like these two, it's like our trio of Dobbs, Concepcion, and AJ Brown is just lethal. We got to have all these guys on the field. Then you can just ship off Kayshon Boutte there and make a little something back on those draft picks you traded away for AJ Brown, or
And I think that's important too because Boutte and Pop are both on expiring deals, and that makes a difference, right? Now you can re-sign those guys if you want, but if you love KC Concepcion and you feel like he's the guy for you and he's going to change your offense, you can draft him and still trade for AJ Brown and then maybe move on from Kayshon Boutte, right? So it's one of those things where I look at it and say, yeah, just because you make one move doesn't mean it eliminates the other one. I do think if you're talking about trading up to get him, if you're giving up 95 to go up and get Concepcion, then I'm kind of looking at saying, okay, you used a first-round pick and a third-round pick, and you probably traded a second-round pick for AJ Brown. We're spending a lot of assets on one position.
Yeah, which, look, if it makes the position
right
elite, can be worth it. But and that's where I think you get to a point. Like if you're trading up in the first round for a receiver, I don't think you're making the AJ Brown move, just because that also shows you like this guy enough that you feel like you probably don't have to go get AJ Brown. But then the other half of this question is if you're drafting a guy in the second round, is that, are we still looking at AJ Brown? If you're trading up in the second round, are we still looking at AJ Brown? If you're, if he takes one in the third, at what point are the Patriots drafting a receiver this year and saying, all right, well, actually, we don't need to look at AJ Brown anymore.
Right. And Concepcion's a very different player than AJ Brown is, right? So like it certainly doesn't eliminate them. I do think that if they were to draft like someone like Denzel Boston at 31, that's where you say, okay, story. Now they're not drafting AJ Brown because they play the same position, right? It doesn't make sense.
That's where player type is so important. Like if they draft a Malachi Fields on day 2, you might say, okay, this is a similar role for what you'd want AJ Brown. Maybe they don't want to make that move now, or maybe they feel like they're okay if they aren't able to get a deal done. Versus if they take Antonio Williams, the Clemson wide receiver.
Yep.
Different role. Okay. Just because you added him doesn't mean you're also not going to go out and get AJ Brown. So, I think which specific receivers they invest in here is also a big part of this.
Well, and Goalie makes the point too that, basically, right, what if they wait? They pass on a guy like KC, and then Philly doesn't trade AJ Brown, or another team jumps in and steals him from you. So I think that's a possibility, right? And you have to live with that possibility. But the Patriots, I think, need to look at it and say, all right, we're drafting the best player available. We don't think that X player is going to be there. We don't think he's going to be there at 31. If these guys make it to 31, well, now we like what we have. And I think the big part of it for me is that there's 30 picks ahead of him, right? You start doing the math in your head, and you're like, okay, you're going to have 5 or 6 edge rushers go, probably. You're going to have at least one quarterback for sure go. You're going to have a running back go. Maybe you have 7 tackles go. Now you're looking at saying, okay, well, there's 12, 16 picks right there. You're going to have probably a corner go. I think Chris Johnson's probably going to go. You're going to have a few safeties go. You're going to have a few linebackers go. Now you're looking at saying, okay, well, there's going to be some guys there that we like. Now, who's going to fall? We don't know, right? Is that some of the edge rushers that we like? Is it some of the wide receivers that we like? Is it some of the tackles that we like? And I think this kind of gets to to this point, and Nikhil asked this question a while back, but what position do you think they're most likely to take in the draft? And I assume he's talking about just the first round, but what are you looking at? What do you think they're looking at in the first round? And I think, I think this is where it depends on what happens in those first 30 picks, right? You're not drafting at 4 anymore, right? You have to wait and see what happens. What happens if you get to 27 and both Miller and INH are sitting there? And what if Caleb Lomu is sitting there too? And you get 3 tackles that you like sitting there. You might just sit at 31 and say, all right, we're good. Then you get to 31, those guys are still on the board. And you're like, okay, well, let's move back, right? And because we like all 3 of these guys, or whatever, or you just stick and you take the guy you like the best, right? So there are these different things that we have where it's like, you have to see what happens in those first 30 picks, right? If everything goes chalk, which it never does, but if everything goes chalk, you feel pretty strongly that I feel pretty strongly they're going to take a tackle at 31. If everything goes chalk the way we think it's going to go, and it's like, okay, INH is sitting there, or Blake Miller's sitting there, he's the guy you take him at 31, and he fills in for Morgan Moses after this year. But it never goes chalk, so you got to sit around and wait.
Yep. Oh, and that's I think you look at their visits. What's so interesting is the number of guys they've met with who are probably going to go around pick 31 who are not tackles. Armisen Thomas at edge obviously makes sense, but like Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, a safety. This is not a position of need for 2026, but they brought him in for a top 30 visit. The Casey Concepcion at wide receiver. We talked about Caden McDonald, defensive tackle from Ohio State. Defensive tackle, not really necessarily a need for 2026. Long term, yeah, there's the need there. I think one of the things you have to be prepared for when you're prepping for the draft is like you just don't know how the board's going to fall. And sometimes that means if we really want to take a tackle, all the tackles are off the board. What do we got to do now? There's also the flip side of this, which is that like if a position is a position of need and you're drafting players at that position because you think you have to fill the need, but you don't actually like the prospects, well, then you don't think you're filling the need. If you're looking for a starting tackle and you're drafting a guy who you have rated as a backup tackle, well, you've not fixed your problem of finding a starting tackle.
Yeah.
And like the flip of this, I always look at the 2023 draft. Patriots badly need a tackle. They get on the clock in the first round, tackles on the board, and one of the top guys available, they trade back. They weren't that interested in Broderick Jones.
Right.
And then at 17, you take Christian Gonzalez. Was corner a need? Absolutely not. I mean, kind of, but not an immediate need. But they said this guy's the best player on our board right now. We can't pass on him. We'll figure the rest of it out later. Gonzalez has been awesome for them.
Yep.
This is one of the questions I had is like, who are the guys that could fall in the first round where you're just kind of abandoning your plan and saying, well, we thought we were taking the tackle here, but we got to take this guy instead because we can't pass up on this talent and we're going to figure it out later. Because you have later picks in this draft, you have free agency, you have the trade market, you've got next year's draft. If you can't find a long-term tackle this year, there's other ways to get there. So what guys do they like that if they slide to 27, they say, we got to go get him? Jordan Tyson. If Jordan Tyson falls, are they making a move? Ione, I don't think he's going to fall, but the Penn State guard, if he falls, is that somewhere they're like, we just got to go pick this guy? And Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, who they brought in, if he's there at 31, yeah, like I think there's a world where McNeil-Warren, INH, and Casey Concepcion are all on the board at 31, and the Patriots might just walk away from that saying, we're going to take McNeil-Warren. Yeah, the other 2 positions are bigger needs. We think McNeil-Warren is the best player here, so we're going to take him, and we're going to figure out, the goal is to have a team, not necessarily, like you can win games in a lot of ways. So,
yeah, the fascinating name for me that I keep looking at is Kenyon Sadiq, and I don't know, I don't know what's going to happen there. I assume he's going to go in the top 15, certainly in the top 20 would be my assumption. But I don't know. It's an interesting one, and then you start to look at it and say, okay, well, what if some of the corners are available? Delaney's not going to be available, but what if
Colton Hood, TD is bringing up.
Yep. Yeah. So what if Colton Hood or the kid from San Diego State, Chris Johnson, is there? Right. Like, do you like those guys enough to say, screw the board? Screw what we thought. Right. Forget about what we thought, and let's just draft the guy. And so I think that that to me is a big part of it, where it's like, yeah, okay, like this is what we're looking at, and that might not be a need right now. Corner might not be a need, but one of those guys, whether it's Avion Terrell, right, from Clemson, who looks like a dog, right, like
he has come on late here as a runner.
Yes, but if one of those guys is sitting there, it's like, do you just take him and just say, screw it? Like, he's the best player, and so I think that's one of those things for me where I like the idea of just saying, F it, draft the best guy, because ultimately it's about having the best players. That's who wins, right? And you got to build the team, and you need good players, and we talked about this, having good foundational players at different positions, and being solid across the board. But ultimately it comes down to, do you have a guy that can go out and win you the game, right? And look at how Milton Williams did it like multiple times last year, where it was like, it's the fourth quarter, we need a play, and he's like, okay, takes the guard, chucks him, and gets a sack and wins the game. And it's like, you got to have a guy that can do that. And if you add a guy that can do that, I don't care what the position is. I don't care you have Christian Gonzalez on one side. If you add another one and he's a shutdown corner, you have two lockdown corners. And so now you're saying, okay, we have two lockdown corners. We have a good defensive line. We like our safeties. How are you scoring on us?
How many years in a row did the Eagles just take defensive line?
Right.
And it's like, they're just going to keep doing it. And then you get to the Super Bowl and it's wave after wave of guys, and Mahomes is under siege. And it's like, I think this is one of the key things to remember in football. Like, there's a lot of, it's basically the world's most complicated game of like rock, paper, scissors. There's a lot of ways to get to winning games. So like the two big ones are always, it's either be able to win a lot of different types of matchups, or be so dominant at a couple types of matchups and be able to dictate them that even though teams know what's coming, there's nothing they can do.
It just doesn't matter. Right.
Which is like, I think about 2013 Seahawks defense, 2015 Broncos defense, the way that happened, where you're just able to dictate games, versus the Patriots for so long. We're like, one reason why they're not going to have as many Hall of Famers as a lot of other dynasties is they're like, we don't feel like we need, 4 All-Pros who are going to go dictate the game for us. We got Tom Brady on one side. Well, obviously you do have 2 All-Pros and like Brady and Gronk for a lot of that. But like defensively, it was a lot of, we just want to be able to do a lot of things. And we don't have to be elite at any of them. We just got to be good at a lot of things. And that'll give us a chance in every single game that we play. And like you look at receiver. Like I think receiver is a need for the Patriots. We had the question about what happens if, no one falls to you in the draft and then you just can't make an A.J. Brown trade. This is why you draft Drake May, because he can elevate guys. And, if your passing game only ends up being number 10 in the NFL instead of number 4, like it might have been if you're able to get some of these moves. But what do you do with the assets instead? Would you rather have the number 4 passing game and, the number 26 running game, or the number 10 passing game and the number 10 running game? If we're talking about drafting a guard who might unlock your offense, that type of thing.
Yeah.
There's a balance to be struck there. And at the end of the day, winning football games, it's just a mathematical formula. It's points scored and points allowed. Right. So you're trying to impact either side of that formula.
Yeah. And that's, that's why I love the question about like, who is it that's going to force your hand, right? And I think in the second and third round, and I think especially in the third round, but certainly in the second as well, I think the Patriots have the assets to do that. You're drafting at 125 and 131, which are both pretty close together. I'm okay moving one of those picks, right? Alex Barth talked about this on Monday. Like, I'm okay moving one of those picks. If you move one of those picks for a third rounder, you're moving up like 20 spots. You can get up to the 70s to get a guy if you're willing to trade one of those picks. And you say, okay, we love the guy that's sitting there at 74. Well, we're going to trade 95 and 131 to jump up to 74 and take that guy.
Yeah.
Right? Or maybe even throw in one of those 6-rounders, and now we can go up and get the guy that we want. And we've jumped up 20 picks to do so. And you feel really good about that situation. Now, then you get a long gap, obviously, whatever, but so what? But I just think that that's a situation where you can be aggressive and you can go after one of those things. I also think a lot of people are talking about the 2027 draft, and you don't want to part with those 2027 draft picks, which is fine. But I think the Patriots can use that to their advantage if they want to. You can move on from a 4th-round pick in 2024 to move up, 2027, I'm sorry, to move up and, take a guy or whatever the case may be. So I just think if that's the case and people are willing to do that and you like the depth in this draft, then sure, make some of those moves if you'd like to. Then the question becomes, what are you doing for A.J. Brown? If you're trading a 2nd-round pick for A.J. Brown next year, you probably don't want to trade too many picks next year either. So, that's part of it, right? Obviously. But I just think, when you start looking around and saying, okay, well, what's available? Who's on the board? All right. What can we use to be aggressive and kind of go get the guys that we want? And, it's going to be really fascinating to see what happens on those first 30 picks, because you start looking at the board. And even you just look at, when you look at mock draft database, if you just look at the consensus big board mock draft database, 30 is Peter Woods, the D lineman out of Clemson. 31 is Caden McDonald, defensive lineman out of Ohio State. 32 is Cassius Howell. 33 is Ty Simpson. 34 is Ian Eacher. 35 is Colton Hood. 36 is C.J. Allen. Zion Young, Caleb Banks, Chris Johnson, and then Chase Bizantis, the guard from Texas A&M. And then if you want to go all the way to like CC, Pregnon, Malachi Lawrence, Jadarian Price, and Jacob Rodriguez, that's from 30 to 45. Those are your 15 guys. Those guys are all pretty damn good players, right? Like, it seems like it. Now, again, not all those guys are going to hit. We know that. We just talked about that, right?
But probably of those 15, if 5 of them end up being good starters in the NFL, that's a really good hit rate.
Right. And that's the thing. Yeah. The question is, can you pick the right guy? Right? Yeah. Can you find the right guy out of that 15, and not just find the right guy? Not only find the right guy, but find the right guy that's going to fit your system and work well with your coaching staff and the players you currently have. And it's all about finding the guys, not only that are the best players, but also the best fits for you. And, hopefully they can do that.
Well, then the other part of this, we talked about, who you might trade up for, and, the way the board falling affects your plans. Talked about that with the context of the first round, but that matters for the second and third. If you get INH at 31, and you're like, man, the first round felt it was perfectly. Now we just need an edge rusher in the second round. But then a run on edge rushers happens in the early 40s.
Mm-hmm.
And then because of that, someone like Emmanuel Pregnon drops and is on the board at 55.
Right.
Are you considering making a trade up to go get him? Or like, how does the board fall? Which I think one of my other questions in general with any draft is going to be, where are the runs and how do you play that? Because there's also a world here, I think, if you're the Patriots, where you just get stuck in an awkward position where like you want to draft a receiver, but then by the time your pick comes up at the end of the second round, Chris Bell is gone then, and maybe Brazel is gone then. Although I'm not a Chris Brazel guy.
Same.
It's tough because the highs with him are so high, but there's just enough red flags that I'm worried. But let's say you get to the end of the second round and it's like Bell's gone, Brazel's gone, Bernard's gone, Zachariah Branch is gone, Fields is gone, Surratt is gone. Like, there's just been a run on receivers in the second, and it's like, all right, well, we want a receiver here, but the best guy on the board is Ted Hurst. Are you okay taking that guy at 63? Is that the pick you want to make, or do you want to go with a different position? How does this impact your AJ Brown stuff? And I think it's the same thing at edge. A lot of these guys, to me, are not significantly different. Lawrence, Thomas, Akis, Moore, Dennis Sutton, Romello Height, Kieran Crawford. This is all a lot of the same guy, slightly different fonts. And, how does the NFL view these guys? Because you could have a run on those guys in the 40s. Or you might be on the board at 63 and Malachi Lawrence is just still there because everyone's like, well, there's depth here, so we're not going to take someone yet. We think we can get a guy later. I think being able to read other teams and have an idea of when those positional runs might happen so you can get ahead of them is so important. And also simulating, what happens if you take eye nature and then when you get on the clock at 63, all the receivers you liked are gone, all the edge defenders you liked are gone. What do you do now? You have to have answers for that.
100%. And I'm sure they're going to run through some things. The Patriots, by the way, did this last year. I believe that they moved up to get Andy Borregales, and then 4 picks later, Tyler Loop gets drafted to Baltimore, right? They knew another kicker was going to go. They wanted to take the kicker that they wanted, and so they grabbed him. They did the same thing with Joshua Farmer at 137. If you look at the draft, 137 is Joshua Farmer, D tackle. 139 is a D end. 140 is a D tackle. 142 is a D tackle. 143 is a D tackle. Right, and then 148 is a D tackle. And they also took Braden Swinson in there, at 146. But the Patriots are sitting there at D tackle, and they draft that guy. And again, 1, 2, 3 guys go in the next 5 picks or the next 6 picks. Half of the next 6 picks were defensive tackles. And it's like you caught the beginning of that run, and actually 2 picks earlier was another D tackle by Vegas, but like you catch kind of the beginning of that run to say, we like this D tackle, we're going to take him because we feel like there's some D tackles going to go off the board here. And I just hitting on that stuff just is great. And look, sometimes that doesn't matter because that run of tackles or that run of defensive linemen or that run of wide receivers all stink, right? And the guy you drafted stinks, but it still feels like we got to get to the kind of the front of that line.
Yep. No, agreed. I think kind of related to that, it's how aggressive are the Patriots willing to be to draft an edge rusher. It's one of my questions. Like, I think tackle is the position they're most likely to take in the first round. Edge rusher is the position where I'm most confident they use a top 100 pick on it.
I think so too. Yeah.
Clearly a need. They talked about one down speed there. They've had top 30 visits with so many of these guys. But how aggressive are you willing to be? Like if the run at edge, if you don't take one at 31 and the run on edge rusher starts at 40, are you trying to move up in the second round, go get your guy? Or are you sitting back and saying, we just might not get the guy we liked and we might have to punt on it this draft? And we're gonna get to the pressure some other way. We're gonna figure out another way to win football games because we're not gonna get the guy we want. Or reverse. We like these guys. This is a position we want to invest in. We like this class. We're gonna go get someone. And kind of jumping off of that, it's we know they had the top 30 visits. We all kind of view from the outside top 30 visits as all right. Here's the players or positions that they're interested in. But you're also bringing guys in because you have questions for them and you want to work them out. So there is an assumption that, they're going to draft players they did visits with, and they probably will. There's no chance that all 30 of these visits went as well as they were hoping. There's definitely players that they visited with and said, oh boy, yeah, we're not. Like, what if that visit with Max INHR, when Vrabel's working with them, they didn't really like what they saw. And we've thought for a while that, man, they really like this guy. And then he's on the board at 31, and they just trade back. Like, they're just not that interested. We've been assuming the top 30 visit meant they liked him. And in reality, it meant they didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and we don't know that, right? And I also think one of the big questions for me, too, is, like, how do they view their positions, right? Do they view guard as a need? Mm-hmm. Right? I think you have to view guard as a long-term need. But do they view guard as a need now? Are they willing to spend a second-round pick on a guard, right? If a guy like Emmanuel Pregnon falls to you, are you willing to move up for him a few picks like you kind of mentioned? But I think, too, like defensive line is a fascinating one for me. There's so many defensive linemen this year that I love. I love Caleb Proctor. I love Landon Robinson. I really like Albert Regis. Albert Regis is a little bit different player, but like Grayson Halton is a guy I really like a lot. These are penetrating, smaller defensive linemen that can get after the passer and get into the backfield, right? They're flying through the offensive line and causing havoc in the backfield. Is that what they want? Or do they more value a guy like Caden McDonald, maybe a guy like, what's his name, Nick Barrett, a guy like that, who is more of a nose tackle than he is an attacking guy? Can still get after the passer a little bit, right? And still a pretty good player, but he's more of a nose tackle. What do they view as a need for them, right? They brought in Caden McDonald, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they like him and they're going to draft him at 31, but you bring him in. I'm curious about what it looks like and what they think that they need and what they think fits best in that system. Because again, I think Caleb Proctor or Landon Robinson would be a home run pick for this team, right? I love both of those guys, but they might look at it and say, no, that's not the type of guy we want. We need a more of a run-stuffing Kairos Tonga type guy to fill that role. They don't fill that role. They're not going to get onto the field because we just don't have a spot for that type of player. And so we have to take someone else in a different mold. I'm curious about that.
Well, then I'd also add like this. There's a lot of people who don't like this defensive line group or defensive tackle group.
Yeah.
And then you look at the Caden McDonald visit, and it's like, all right, are they bringing him in because maybe they're not really interested in any defensive tackles after, the top of the first round there? So they want to get a visit in because they want to know, like, maybe they're just like, we're going to invest in the trenches early. It's going to be pass rusher, it's going to be tackle, or it's going to be defensive, tackle, or guard. And maybe they're just like, all right, we just want to build in the trenches. And they want to know, is there a world where McDonald's just going to be the best player on the board at 31 and we're going to take him and figure the rest out? And,
Right.
Look at defensive tackle. First of all, you want a rotation of at least 3 playable guys at that spot. Second, Christian Barmore has a number of different off-field concerns right now. And on-field, we had heard was they were not as happy with his performance when Milton Williams was out as they were hoping they were going to be.
Right.
So I think one of those spots is absolutely a long-term need. And we talked about Philly. Drake May doesn't need as many receivers if your defensive line is so good that the other offense can't do anything and you only need to score 16 points to win games.
Exactly.
Like there's a lot, like it's points scored and points allowed, and you're just trying to impact either side of that equation in your favor.
Well, and I think for the Patriots, when you start looking at it and you say, okay, you can do this same exercise at linebacker, you can do the same exercise at tight end, you can do this same exercise at a few different spots, right? Who are guys that you're looking at? Do you want that middle linebacker, that true kind of, he might be a little slower, but he's a real middle linebacker?
Mm-hmm.
Or, like Josiah Trotter is a name like that. Or do you want a guy like Jacob Rodriguez who's going to cover everyone and, does a good enough job on the run, but really is kind of that, is really that coverage linebacker more so than he is, that downhill thumping linebacker. And then at tight end, it's, do you want a guy like Stowers? Do you want a guy like, Lord and Royer, like those guys that are not necessarily inline blockers? Do you like those guys, or do you prefer a guy like Oscar Delp or Sam Roche or a guy like that that's more of an inline guy? I'm just curious to see where they go. If they go, you feel like they have to take a tight end at some point in this draft.
Probably. I will say, but like there have been, I think, 2 different people who have made a Stowers and Patriots connection in the last couple days separately, because Chad Graff of The Athletic did it, and forgetting who the other one was. I was listening to Locked On Patriots earlier, and they were talking about that.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting.
That's not something I necessarily would have put together.
Same.
But also, if you think you have your possession tight end and your blocking tight end on the roster right now, going to get a receiving tight end who's a big body and can develop with May, you see the vision there. Like you can see why they'd be interested in that. It's just not necessarily what I would have predicted. So is there a world where we're going to sit here all offseason and talk about, all right, the top 2 picks, it's going to be tackle and edge rusher, and they go Caden McDonald in the first round and then trade up and take Stowers in the second? We're all like, well, what the hell just happened here?
Right. Yeah, it's true.
And, yeah.
One Patriots guy here mentions Red Murdoch from Buffalo. Really nice sleeper linebacker. I like him a lot on day 3. I will say, I got to give a shout out to my guy, Phil Perry. Phil had Emory Hunt from CBS Sports on. It's a great listen every year because Emory Hunt's a guy who like goes to all of the games, all of the, all-star games. He follows college football all year long, and he's given like deep sleepers, like deep sleepers, guys that are D2 prospects still, guys that are, played in smaller systems or played here and there and kind of did some different things. I think he named a tight end, and I forget. Oh my God. I honestly forget who he even named, what the guy's name even was. I think he was talking about a guy from, I don't know. I forget.
I would listen to that too, and that name's just they talked about a number of tight ends.
Oh, no, it's not Nate Regina. No, I forget what it was. But either way, it was a guy that like the starting tight end is getting like a little bit of buzz, right? And I forget exactly where it was, but the starting tight end is getting a little bit of buzz. But he's like, yeah, the backup tight end is a guy that like played quarterback his whole career and then moved to tight end for 1 year as a transfer and caught like 6 passes. But he has like great athleticism. And I'm like, what are you even talking about? So, it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, that's a guy that's not on anyone's radar. He had 6 catches last year. He played tight end for 1 season. But, could that be a guy where it's like the Patriots are doing all this stuff? All the teams are doing all this stuff as well. If Emory Hunt knows who they are, all the teams do as well. And so then you start to say, oh, all right, well, maybe that's a guy they're going to target late in the draft, And so I'm really curious to see how that looks. Craig Woodson's a guy that's interesting because Craig Woodson is a guy that was not super high on the board, right? When they took him in the 4th round, and everyone just kind of scratched their head when that happened because you're like, who the hell is this Craig Woodson guy? And then Daniel Jeremiah instantly comes out and says, hey, this guy's one of my favorite guys in the draft. I love him. And I'm like, oh, okay, maybe they were right. And turns out he's pretty damn good, right? And so, by the end of the year, he's one of the best players on defense. And so, that's a hit for the Patriots in a situation where we're all like scratching our heads, like, who the hell is this guy you're taking in the top of the 4th, right? And so,
the last question I'd written down that we didn't talk about is like, what's that point where the consensus board kind of starts to go out the window, and especially there's a typically point like the 5th round where it becomes obvious, all right, we've hit the UDFA section of everyone's board, and you're gonna have a guy who's ranked 378th on the board, followed by a guy who is ranked 103rd,
right?
And things just start getting really weird. When does that point happen, and like, what do they start looking for then? Especially because all the hype's going to be about the top of the draft, but you make your money on days 2 and 3, and the Patriots have so many 6th round picks in particular this year. Where do they use those? That can be your punter, that could be your backup kicker, or not backup quarterback with one of those spots. Linebacker, I think that's a big. They talked about liking day 3 linebackers. That feels like an obvious connection to draw. Yep. Tight end, blocking tight ends in that range. Where do they want to go with this, and what skill sets they're looking for there? I'm so curious to find that out.
Yeah, and you talk about those D3 linebackers, right? Red Murdoch, we already mentioned, but Lander Barton from Utah, who we've talked about a little bit. Jimmy Rolder, who's fairly new to the position, who I liked a lot. Torian York is a guy that actually Phil mentioned. I think he's in one of my earlier podcasts.
Arms, small guy.
Very short arms, smaller guy, but like athletic, right? So, and so then you start looking at it and saying, okay, but then are we also looking at safeties, right? Eric Hunter is a guy that Emory Hunt mentioned, who's a linebacker from Morgan State. He's 423 on the consensus board. He's adamant that he's going to get drafted and be a decent player, right? Is he the type of guy that, that ends up ending up on a roster somewhere, right? And you start to ask the question about, oh, okay, well, who is this guy, right? Where does he come from? And I think that's really kind of fascinating as well. So I believe that I forget what Pro day results. I think so Eric Hunter, 6'2", 224, ran a 4.45 40, 4.28 in the shuttle, 37-inch vertical, 130-inch broad jump with 33-inch arms and 10.3 hands. So like a little smaller, almost feels like a safety, like a throwback safety, but that's what your linebacker looks like now. If you're looking at it saying like, all right, a 4.28 shuttle and a 4.45 40, right? Like we like this guy in the 6th round, and you need a linebacker, so you draft him and you see, and I've said it, I'm going to continue to say it. You release Marte Mapu, it didn't work. That doesn't mean you stop drafting guys like Marte Mapu. Yeah. Right. And I think that's one of those ones where it's like, okay, yeah, it's a new age linebacker. Do it. Take the shot. See what happens. Maybe you miss again. Maybe he stinks again. Who knows? But take the shot, Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing, I'll kind of flip this back around because CD had mentioned this, calling it they're extremely razor thin at linebacker and edge. You also wonder, like, I think those are positions where they probably draft guys. But is there also a point where, let's say you get to the end of the 2nd round, you want to draft an edge rusher, but they brought in Romello Height and they brought in R. Mason Thomas. Let's say you get to 63 and those two guys are on the board, but they didn't really like how those 30 visits went, and they don't think any of the other edge guys are year 1 impact players. So now you're immediately, anyone that you're picking, you're really looking longer term with it. And they might say, we don't really want to make that pick here. Instead, we're just going to go bring in Jadeveon Clowney before camp.
Yeah.
Or like, Anthony Jennings is still a free agent. Jelani Tavai still a free agent. Both of those guys, in theory, if they wanted back at like a vet minimum, they've been around, you want to bring them back before camp at a reduced contract from what they would have been. There's veterans at all these spots that they can sign. That's something you're going to be weighing against. Like when you're looking at year 1 impact from a guy, if they just, don't like some of these players and they think, yeah, we're better. This is a need for 2026, and to fill the need for 2026, we're better served bringing in a vet street free agent as a mercenary for 1 year, kick the can down the road. We'll try again in 2027 draft to address this long term. That's totally fine too. There's a lot of ways to skin the cat, as they say.
That's what smart teams do. That to me is what smart teams do. You don't have to reach on a guy you don't like. And I think, and you've said it a few times, and we said it last year, and I love the way you put it, Matt, is the fact that if you have a need and you're drafting just for need, but you think the guy you're drafting stinks, then you haven't filled the need because the guy you took stinks. And so you're hoping that this guy is better than you think he's going to be, and you're just drafting a guy because he's at a position. That's dumb. It doesn't make any sense. And so it's like, oh, we need a linebacker. Well, this guy's has an LB next to his name. Let's draft him because he has an LB. It's like, no, you don't do that. And so that's where you start getting into trouble, because then you're just drafting guys, right? And I think, when you're talking about a UDFA, then I'm okay with it, right? I'm okay with
6th, 7th round, yeah,
right, with doing that. We're saying, okay, we need a linebacker. We don't love this guy, but we don't really love anyone else that's on the board either. Let's take him because we need a linebacker, right? No one's trying to move out. No one's calling to trade up with us. Let's just take this guy and just see what happens, And maybe you get to camp and you're like, this guy can't play. He stinks. You got him. He's a 6th round pick. Whatever, right?
Yeah.
But you can't be doing that early in the draft.
Well, like I talked about with that, my reminders piece too. You like in today's NFL, you can draft a guy and have him stink year 1 and still keep him around the facility for a year or two and see if he's able to find something later on.
Braden Swenson's a great example of that.
Hopefully. And this is also where, I think one of the great Belichick approaches was to look at guys with special teams upside on particular day 3 of the draft. Because if you want someone to develop, like the best, if you want to develop in the NFL, you have to practice. You have to be in games. You actually have to do the things to get better at them. Right. No easier way to put yourself in position to do that. Like if you're a special teamer, probably a good athlete, probably tackle, play in space. And if you're good at those things, then you're going to be active on game day, which means now you are by default one of the backups for a position out there. So if someone gets hurt, you're going into the game. You're going to be involved in the game planning. Like so you're gonna have a chance to grow into a role years down the line. A
Right.
prime example of this is Julian Edelman, someone
Yep.
who sticks around the team. He has a great rookie year for UDFA and doesn't really do much the next 3 years, but is an elite punt returner at the time. So he sticks around the roster. And he does not find his groove as a receiver really until year 5 in the NFL, when they signed someone ahead of him in that role anyway, Danny Amendola, who tears his groin week 1 and misses like half that season. And it's like, all right, well, now it's Edelman. And he finally came into his own. So that's when I'm looking at day 3 picks. I'm looking at guys with special teams upside. I'm looking with guys who are really athletic. You want to bet on the ceiling and the athletic traits, because those are typically the things that actually give you the floor to have a seat at the table.
Well, I think a good example of that is Marcus Jones, right? Where Marcus Jones, and he played right away, pretty much, right? And but he was an elite punt returner from the jump. He's a guy that got hurt a lot. He played on defense, but didn't play a ton on. He wasn't a starter or anything like that on defense. Played, but again, was hurt. But because he had that punt return ability, he stayed around, and he's able to develop into. I believed he should have been an all-pro slot corner, but that's one of those things where you look at it and say, yeah, he sticks around because he's such a good punt returner, right? And he still is, right? That hasn't changed, but it took him a little while to find his real groove on defense. And now you look at it and say, okay, not only is he an elite punt returner, but he also is a very, very good slot corner as well. And now we feel really good about where we're at with him, right? And, and obviously the Patriots rewarded him with a contract this year. But, I think there were some people questioning whether he was going to – Matt, you were talking about it, and you weren't the only one that were talking about whether he'd be on the team this year or not, right? Or this past year or not. And, because would he fit – would he fit the scheme fit and all of those stuff? And then now you look at it and say, well, yeah, not only does he fit the scheme, but he's like one of their most important players on defense, captain and everything else. And so, it's one of those interesting things where it's like, those guys can grow, and it's like, hey, we thought he was pretty good, but now he grows into something even more than that, right? And I think that that's having that special teams ability is huge, and so we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, even this year, Elijah Ponder is a UDFA, is someone who really good athlete, can play on special teams, and that's your ticket to the dance right there. And you make the most of it, and all of a sudden he's starting playing a lot of reps, at least in playoff games, and run to the Super Bowl. Like that,
having a serious impact. Yeah. Yep. Should have scored a touchdown in the Texans game.
Yeah. So I think there's one reminder that I should have put in the article and I didn't. Well, I'll just say it here, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is that you're filling out a roster of 53 players. Not all 53 are going to be elite at all of the things.
Right.
There's no football team ever that has been equally great at all of the things. Every team has strengths. Every team has weaknesses.
True.
Only one team has ever not lost a game in a season. You're not going to build a perfect team. So, keeping that in mind, you're going to have to accept trade-offs. You're not going to be great at everything. You're not going to have to be great at specific things that you pick to be great at. You're going to invest in specific things that you think are the best ways to invest for your group. So if you're the Patriots, this is where it's like, all right, what happens if they just can't get a receiver this year? Mm-hmm. That can be fine if you make up for that with the other things. And, that goes the other direction. If they trade for A.J. Brown and draft Casey Concepcion, well, you're probably going to be a little bit weaker in the pass rush. Well,
right.
You're hoping that you're going to be winning a lot of games 38-34 because you've got elite receivers and Drake May, and the stress that puts on defenses to improve the running game and improve your offensive line. It's not there's a lot of variables and factors that go into football and strategy, and you have to find ways to press your advantage in certain spots. Take 1 point on your roster and make it a pressure point for other teams. Whether it's pass rush with Eagles or receiver like we've seen, or offensive line. You want to have a unit that you think can take you over the top, and it's going to be one of your, and that also means you're going to have units where you're like, we're just getting by.
Yeah, and that's okay. So TD asked a question about Gonzo. I think we got to wrap it up here, but do you think the Patriots will pay him 5 for 200 with $120 million guaranteed?
I don't know what the top of the cornerback market looks like right now. I don't remember the years, so I'm not going to give specific numbers.
Yeah,
I have no doubt he's going to stay in New England. They're going to sign him.
Yeah.
I think the only reason nothing has signed is that I think his Witherspoon hasn't signed either.
correct.
Whoever signs second of those two is going to get the slightly higher dollar figure, and I think that
It's a waiting game right now.
Yeah. And I'm going to guess both players end up signing probably back to back, like right before camp or something like that. But they have the money to sign Gonzalez. He's a great player. He's a scheme fit. He's been a leader for them.
Yeah, and you've seen it. You've seen a lot of.
Oh, same agent. TD says between Witherspoon and Gonzalez. Pat, your audio stopped coming through all of a sudden.
Golly,
you're back.
My back. What a nightmare, dude. So we got to get the heck out of here. But I think that he's the guy you pay. He's the guy you want to pay. There were questions coming in about his toughness, about his willingness to tackle, about all those things. And he shut all of those down. He shut all those people up. He's done that for you. He's played in the role that you want him to play. And he's actually been better than you wanted him to be, than you thought he would be at 17. And, I just think that that's the type of guy that you sign. He's a phenomenal player. And, I think that's, and not just that, but he also has a lot of love around the league. There's a lot of guys around the league that respect his game. And so, when you have other guys, when the players know, they see the guys play. They know what it takes. When they see a guy that's that good and they respect him and they talk about him like he's that good, he probably is. Right. And so I think that, those are the guys that you want to pay. And I have no doubt they're going to do that with Gonzo. It's just like Drake May. Listen, they could probably get 2 firsts for him, but why? Right? Like the Jets traded Sauce Gardner because they stink. Yeah. And by the time the Jets are good, Sauce Gardner is going to be old. Well, I mean, everyone's going to be old. Everyone living right now is going to be old by the time the Jets are good again. But Sauce Gardner is going to be old by the time they're good, hypothetically, right? So, trade him now for 2 first-round picks and see what you can do, right? But, the Colts re-sign him instantly because he's that good of a player. So, and they're not necessarily in win now mode, but they feel like, yeah, we can win. We can do this. And I think that's the real question. I have no doubt that Kraft is gonna spring for the money. I know, Felger has been pushing this Kraft is cheap angle for years. He's not. It's just not true.
If they don't sign Christian Gonzalez, it's not going to be because Kraft's refusing to sign a check. It's going to be because whatever he's asking for, they've decided they would rather just have the draft capital you can recoup.
Right.
I will say, you look at the top of I pull up the numbers. Top of the corner market: Stingley, Sauce, Trent McDuffie, all signed kind of back to back. Look at the average per year: 30 for Stingley, 30 and 100,000 for Sauce, literally just one hair more, and then 31 million for McDuffie.
Right.
So I'm going to guess Christian Gonzalez gets 32, 33, 34, something like that per year.
Or it could be more. And the thing is that as this salary cap continues to explode, it's just going to get more expensive. So do it now.
I don't think it'll be more than 35 because it's going to be in the same tier as
I think you're right.
But I think what ends up mattering more is how much of it is actually fully guaranteed.
Yeah.
It was Stingley was 48 million guaranteed. Sauce Gardner was 40 million guaranteed. Duffy is 50 million guaranteed. So I'm gonna guess something that includes equal to or higher than 50 on the fully guaranteed and above 31 million per year. That's the ballpark you're looking in. If he's asking for 40 million per year, then you might trade him. But
yeah. So we'll see. But all right, that's gonna do it for us tonight. I think. What do you got?
TD has a quick question about Sauce Gardner. Sauce Gardner has asked about saying $37 million for Sauce Gardner. He has 2 years where the cap hit is $37 million. That's 2029 and 2030. But the other years on it are much lower cap hits, $20 million, $26 million. It's a $2 million void cap hit year.
And it's also ultimately he doesn't care about cap hit. We're not really talking about cap hit. We're really more talking about what he's getting paid.
Well, in the number that the players care about is the average per year, because that's kind of the respect number. That's the number where when you're ranking yourself, you can say, well, this is how much I got per year. So like for Sauce, that number's $30.1 million. That's his average, which when he signed it put him at the number one corner by the tiniest amount, and he's now the number two corner because someone else has signed. And that, two contracts being close together like that is, I'm sure, how Gonzalez and Witherspoon's going to go.
Right. And just to be clear, right, he says real number is $37 million. It's not.
No,
it was 4 years, $120.4 million. So it's 30.1 per year. And again, they spread the cap out. They spread the cap hits in different ways so that it counts against the cap this way, and so on and so forth. But what he's getting is $30.1 million per year. That's what he's getting. You can spread it out however you want, but ultimately what the players are looking at is what am I getting paid per year? And that's the idea. Also
worth noting, there's no guaranteed salary for Sauce Gardner after 2027.
It's true. Yep. It's literally zero. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just the bonus money that's guaranteed for him at that point. So like the Colts, if they wanted to, could cut him and save money before the 2028 season, which I'm sure would be a disappointment for them to be moving on from Gardner that early if that's what happened. And he'd also still only be 28 years old then. So something would have had to have seriously gone wrong at that point. And if they were to cut him then, they don't even see those $36 million per year seasons. Like he's not on the books at that point anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And T's asking if it was a 2-year deal. Really, it's not a 2-year deal, but it's basically it's like a 2-year extension.
There's an out after the 2-year deal.
But it's not even like it's like team options for the next 3 years, basically at differing amounts of how much it hurts them to move on.
Right.
Like in all 3 of those years, they save money if they move on from him, but you also still have dead money in all of those years. So like you're still gonna, like, for any of those years, if they cut him, you're still gonna be paying him on the cap not to play for you.
Right.
So it's just, how much sunk cost are you willing to take?
Yeah, agreed. All right. That's going to do it for us tonight. Matt's going to be back Monday night with a mock draft madness. Nelson, if you're out there, my friend, I know we have a mock draft from you. I'm going to forward that to Matt so they can talk about it on Monday. We just didn't get to it tonight. But we are going to get to it, I promise. And then we'll be talking about the draft on Thursday night after the draft, and probably on Friday night after the draft, and probably on Saturday or whatever. So,
and I don't know exactly with your crews what your availability is going to be. So for the draft, it might just be a bunch of recap episodes from me for each of the picks.
That's probably what's going to happen. I think I might be available Thursday night and Friday night after the draft. I think I might even be available Saturday night after the draft, but I'm not 100% sure about that. I don't know what the schedule looks like. I can tell you I definitely will not be available on Sunday, but we'll see. So I'm going to do my best to be around, but also it's a full family trip. I'm not leaving the family behind so I can go podcast about the draft. Sorry, I'm not doing it. So, but nevertheless, but one guy, by the way, we haven't talked about, who I think I'm going to write a mock draft for next week. I think I'm going to do it, but we'll see. I think I might, maybe on the plane. But Eli Heidenreich, keep that name in mind. Eli Heidenreich from Navy. His numbers look scarily similar to a certain running back from San Francisco. He's a wide receiver, kind of fits that running back build. really could be a late round pick for the Patriots. I think a guy 5th, 6th round as a receiving back out of the backfield, I think could be interesting guy. Mostly played wide receiver at Navy, but did do a little bit of running back as well. So, I like him. So again, a lot of guys like that in this draft, but Heidenreich's a guy that I just don't think I paid enough attention to. A lot of people talk about him as a fullback. That is just not. It's incorrect. He's not a fullback at all. And so I'm interested to see what it looks like him. So, anyways, yep. So that's what we got. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. Thank you to the chat. I appreciate it. And we will see. We'll talk to you. Well, Matt will talk to you on Monday night. Draft is less than a week away, everyone. We've almost made it.
In 1 month, not 1 month. In 1 week, I'm sure we're all going to be very upset.
Yes, because the Patriots haven't drafted yet, or they drafted some guy we all didn't want, or whatever the case may
back.
be.
We stayed up until 11, and then they traded back.
Yes, exactly. So we'll see. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great night, and we'll be good to each other, and go Pats.